About 2 weeks ago, I picked up this Sony FS700R kit, as you see here, and that's the 700R body, a Tilta camera cage and base plate system with not one, but two dovetails, the condenser microphone, 5 genuine Sony batteries, and of course the Metabones EF to E mount adapter. Now I got all this for $1,000. I was able to find it on dvxuser.com and not on eBay, which was of course a better experience because I was able to communicate with the seller beforehand and not just blindly start bidding on a camera. But anyway, all this for $1,000 at the end of 2020. Now the first question may be, why? Why bother getting such an old camera at the end of 2020, especially when all these new cameras are coming out left and right. We've gone to full frame. What's the significance of getting something this old? So that's what this video is going to be about. So this is my second go around with a Sony FS700. Back in 2014, I was shooting this feature and I knew we needed a high-speed option, and the pictures here shows the FS700 rig that I owned or that I acquired for that show at that time. And this was how I set up the camera with an EVF PL mount, of course the Odyssey 7Q recorder, and Anton Bauer's. So the real question is, how good are the images from the FS700, even going raw out to an external recorder? So let's take a look at some of the shots from that film.
Se lo hago.
So that was 2014. Now in the end of 2020, going into 2021, I will say that this camera, coupled with something like the Atomos Shogun 7 recorder, is still relevant going into 2021. I would not hesitate to use this camera along with the Atomos recorder to shoot a super low budget feature all the way down to a relatively low budget interview, because it's still a good looking camera after all these years with the right add-on equipment. Now naturally, if we had the budget, we'd probably order an Alexa LF or something in that family. If we had less money, probably we'll order a couple of, say, Sony FX9s or FX6s, which are about to come out. Now, the key word that I just used is a couple, because basically in the past 10 years, virtually every shoot that I've worked on has been a multi-camera shoot. So you can imagine if the money is like really tight, something like this for $1,000, the Shogun picked up for $899. It just, when you start talking about getting, 2, 3, or 4 bodies, the savings that you're going to have in the camera department, it's fairly huge. And again, this thing still puts out a very nice image at 4K 60p. And you can go ProRes RAW. So that's a hard combination to beat if you don't have the money. Now, on regular shoots, I have to say I'm not going to push this camera on regular paid shoots because most producers, they want to use something current, and that's perfectly fine. It's their money, it's their budget, and we'll shoot on whatever is required for the job. Having said that, I think there have been times when, say, we're budgeted for 2 cameras, just say like 2 FX9s, and you really, really want to have that third and even the fourth angle. For me, just to bust this out of a case and say, hey, we could do this, it's like super low or even for free, because, my job is really to solve problems. That solves a problem for us, like, taking that 4K, ProRes RAW image, integrating it to whatever system we're using for that shoot. It's a little bit of work in post, but it's definitely possible. By the same token, still photographers always have backup gear. In motion, we never have backup gear. And again, to keep this, in the van or keep it in a Pelican, just sitting there, if we ever have a problem with one of the cameras, we could always take it out, and it won't be an ideal match, I know, but it's something that could keep us going for that day, for that afternoon, until we could get a replacement for the equipment that has failed. So as a backup, I think it's totally relevant as a backup in 2021 also. Again, because 4K 60p, ProRes RAW. The other application for this camera is, I imagine, for webcast. For example, in this pandemic, we're doing more and more webcasts or streaming. And if you're using something like this, the ATEM Mini Pro, instead of a full TriCaster shoot, with this thing, cinema style, going with a full HDMI out or SDI out 1080p, going to something like this. To me, it's easier to work with this camera as opposed to a bunch of mirrorless cameras with the micro HDMI output. Again, if they're not set up for production, they are just problematic, and it's always a cost thing, right? It's like you go to a small camera because of cost. If this is the same cost or cheaper and we could go to this, for me, life is much easier because this is easier to work with, and also it's easier to power. I can't emphasize enough the significance of these classic Sony NPF style batteries. Now, here's a generic battery that I bought on Amazon. I think it was $24. It actually has more capacity than the genuine Sony battery. And besides having a fuel readout on top, this has a USB-A power output for 5 volts and also a little DC barrel output. So these batteries, they're just so frugal and highly functional, and they're just great. They power, besides the camera, they power, monitors, they power the sound device recorder, they power small lights. I mean, they just power so many different pieces of equipment with this classic old battery style. And that is also a tremendous cost savings. Now, the other areas I'm planning to use this camera for specifically is as a test bed. The E-mount. The E-mount is one of the de facto standard lens mounts now, along with, EF, and of course PL and LPL. Now, so many new lenses that are coming out, they're designed for the mirrorless camera bodies. So it's going to be an E-mount, maybe an L mount, could be an X mount, micro four thirds mounts. But again, they don't make those lenses for the EF mount. They just make them for the E mount and variants of it. So this is a tremendously, versatile lens mount. I could test a bunch of different lenses, and of course, going 4K ProRes, it's easy to make comparisons. And, it's so inexpensive, I could just keep it here built as is and test whenever I need to test it. The other application I want to use it for is, I hate to say it, but is rough environments where the camera could be considered as expendable. For example, you're doing car-to-car shots. We have it on a rig. The camera's really low to the ground. Maybe the terrain gets a little rough. Maybe there's debris. Maybe equipment fails, okay? At 4K 60p, tied to the Atomos recorder with an SDI cable, this camera can be, in harm's way. The recorder is safe recording the images. If something happens, no one's going to cry if we lose an FS700R. And in fact, with my insurance, I'll only get a fraction of the cost of this camera because of the deductible I have to pay. So when you think about that, I mean, the frugal nature of this camera for the image that it produces is, again, just a great value and a problem solver. Now, to wrap this up, for me in 2021, this old camera is still relevant because of some of the new technology we have right now, namely Prores RAW and 4K, and the simple fact that the camera still produces a very satisfying image. Now, the other thing that's important is the E-mount. The E-mount has become one of our de facto lens standards, and a lot of lenses are being developed specifically for the E-mount or other mounts with a very shallow flange focal distance, so this remains significant there. Now, it's not for every production, it's not for every producer, but this combination does solve problems, and that's generally a good thing. Well, I hope this video was helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.